And then came the rise of Abraham Lincoln. His election in 1860 on a platform halting the spread of slavery, pushing southern states into secession. And in April 1861, when Confederate guns opened fire on Fort Sumter, the fragile Union shattered into civil war. A war that would rage for 4 bloody years across fields, forests, and towns, testing whether a nation conceived in liberty could endure. As brother fought brother, as new technologies of death filled the air with smoke and screams, and as Lincoln, with words as steady as steel, framed the struggle not only as a fight to preserve the Union, but as a new birth of freedom, culminating in the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863, which transformed the war into a crusade against slavery, drawing enslaved people into the fight for their own liberation. And yet the cost was staggering. From Antietam's fields soaked in blood to Gettysburg's hills echoing with cannon thunder, until in 1865 the Confederacy collapsed, Lee surrendering at Appomattox, and the guns fell silent, leaving a nation triumphant yet torn, victorious yet grieving, and forever changed by the knowledge that liberty would be bought only with sacrifice. But peace did not mean healing. For after the Civil War, the United States entered the long and bitter era of Reconstruction, a time when the shattered South lay in ruins, and millions of newly freed African Americans stepped into freedom, carrying both hope and peril, as radical Republicans in Congress tried to rebuild the Union on foundations of equality, while Southern resistance hardened into violence. Secret societies like the Ku Klux Klan using terror to claw back white supremacy. And though the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments promised freedom, citizenship, and voting rights, those promises were soon strangled by Jim Crow laws, segregation, and disenfranchisement, leaving scars that would last for generations. While at the same time the nation surged into an age of iron, steel, and steam, railroads stitching together east and west, immigrants flooding into cities to work in factories, fortunes rising in the hands of industrial giants like Rockefeller and Carnegie, while laborers, children, and the poor endured sweatshops, slums, and strikes in the smoky crucible of the Gilded Age. And the frontier closed as Native Americans were forced onto reservations, their cultures attacked, and their lands lost in the relentless push of settlers and soldiers, culminating in tragedies like Wounded Knee. Yet America's ambition was not confined to its borders, for by the dawn of the 20th century, it had become a power abroad, seizing territories in the Spanish-American War, projecting influence into the Caribbean and Pacific, and stepping onto the global stage with both pride and unease. While at home, reformers of the progressive era fought against corruption, child labor, unsafe food, and unchecked corporate power, passing new laws and opening the doors to wider democracy. Until in 1917, the rumble of guns across the Atlantic pulled the United States into World War I, a conflict once dismissed as Europe's quarrel, but soon embraced as a fight to make the world safe for democracy. American soldiers marching through the mud of France, their sacrifices helping tip the balance toward Allied victory. And yet the return home was not triumphant but uneasy. The Roaring Twenties bringing jazz, automobiles, speakeasies, and a surge of consumer culture, while deep beneath the glitter the stock market teetered, until the crash of 1929 sent the nation plunging into the Great Depression, breadlines and dust storms painting despair across the land, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt rising with the New Deal, a program of relief, reform, and recovery that reshaped the relationship between government and its people, lifting spirits, though not always lives. And still across the ocean, another storm was gathering. Dictators rising in Europe and Asia, until in 1941, the skies over Pearl Harbor filled with Japanese planes and fire, dragging America once more into global war, a war of staggering scale and purpose, where factories roared with production, women filled assembly lines, and soldiers stormed beaches from Normandy to the Pacific Islands, while in the shadows, scientists in secret laboratories split the atom. And in 1945, as the world gasped at the horror of Auschwitz and the flames of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the United States emerged not only as victorious, but as a superpower, standing on the ashes of war with a new and sobering responsibility: the arsenal of democracy, now a leader of the free world. Its destiny tied no longer just to its own shores, but to the fate of nations across the globe. Yet victory carried with it a new kind of peril. For in the ashes of World War II, the United States faced a rival not across oceans, but across ideologies, as the Soviet Union stood defiant and the Cold War began. An age not of direct battlefields, but of spies, threats, and shadows, where nuclear arsenals loomed like storm clouds and the world lived under the constant fear of annihilation. The United States leading alliances like NATO to contain communism, fighting proxy wars from Korea to Vietnam, where American soldiers trudged through jungles and rice paddies in a conflict that divided the nation at home, protests filling campuses and streets, as the draft and television images brought the brutality of war into living rooms. While at the same time, a quieter but more profound struggle unfolded within America itself, as the civil rights movement rose from the segregated buses of Montgomery, the lunch counters of Greensboro, and the steps of Washington, where Martin Luther King Jr. declared his dream. A movement of courage that challenged centuries of injustice and slowly, though never easily, bent the arc of law and conscience toward greater equality. Even assassinations, riots, and resistance revealed how fragile progress could be. And meanwhile, science and technology redefined what was possible. From the beeping of Sputnik to the giant leap of Apollo 11, when American astronauts planted a flag on the moon, signaling not only victory in a space race, but a triumph of imagination. Yet at home, the turbulence of the 1960s and 70s brought scandal and disillusionment. Watergate toppling a president, oil crises shaking confidence, and new debates raging over the role of government, until the 1980s, when Ronald Reagan's vision of strength and optimism revived American pride, and pressure on the Soviet Union intensified. The Berlin Wall finally crumbling in 1989, as the Cold War came to an end and the United States stood alone as the world's superpower, entering the 1990s with confidence, booming technology, and the promises of a new global order. Yet history offered no end to challenges, for the dawn of the 21st century was shattered by the attacks of September 11, 2001, when planes became weapons and the towers of New York fell in fire and ash, plunging the nation into grief and resolve, launching wars in Afghanistan and Iraq that would stretch across decades, testing America's endurance and raising questions about power, freedom, and security. While at home, the Great Recession of 2008 shook the foundations of prosperity, and bitter political divides widened. Yet amid the turbulence, America continued to reinvent itself, electing its first African-American president, pushing technological frontiers with the internet and digital revolutions, and struggling with questions of immigration, race, climate, and the meaning of democracy in a world both interconnected and unstable. And so the story of the United States, from ancient civilizations to modern superpower, from revolution to resilience, remains a saga not of perfection but of striving, not of unbroken triumph but of persistence. A nation forever tested, forever flawed, yet forever reaching for the promise written at its birth, that freedom and equality, however difficult, might one day belong to all. And as the journey continues, the history of America reminds us that nations, like people, are defined not only by where they began, but by the courage with which they face the future.